and present the session, unless you want me to say something. Otherwise, I think.
No, thanks. I mean, I can quickly do this. Thanks, Paulo. Thanks for everyone who joined the final session of this conference and for mustering the energy and the motivation to make it through the whole day. Very much appreciated. My name is Pahle. I'm the head of the working group Climate and Energy Policy at PIC. Together with me is Sebastian Osorio, who is working with me on the topics of carbon pricing and the Green Deal. So in this final session, we'll present our work. I'll do a short introduction, and Sebastian will walk you through most of our work, and then I will close and put up some issues for discussion. And yeah, so in the morning we talked a lot about, German policy, we looked about technologies, and especially in the webinar, the issue of an accelerated coal phase out came up, and I think that's quite an interesting one, because we already have the experience that we could make some decisions on the national level, and then surprise, surprise, the EU level takes over. And I remember a Bloomberg article that stuck with me. So markets drive coal exit much harder than Merkel does. I found it quite funny. So, I mean, that's a little bit of a broader backdrop for the work we are going to present. Sebastian, can you move to the next slide? And it's about the Green Deal. I hope most of you got to know, heard something about it. It's like a big master plan. And part one of this master plan was, to lay out the strategy, but to adopt more ambitious climate targets on the European level. And this happened at the end of last year. So EU leaders or the governing bodies adopted climate neutrality until 2050 and a target of minus 55% until 2030. And this already happened, as I said, end of last year. And as we already know from multiple instances in the German debate, so adopting new targets is one thing, agreeing on the policies, that's the really hard thing. And this is what the Commission set out to do. In July, it published a proposal, the so-called Fit for 5 package. It's basically a proposal to readjust the existing climate policy architecture to bring it in line with achieving these ambitious targets. And yeah, so it's a very comprehensive package. It, according to my counting, it comprises 14 proposals. There are different views about the proposal, and this is already very telling with regard to the comprehensiveness of the package. So it's really a complete overhaul. And the scale of it is absolutely new, and I think it puts the EU as a leader, as a real frontrunner in terms of ambitious climate policy. And this is also amplified by what Franz Timmermans, the executive vice president, said when he presented the proposal. And here it's a quote from his press statement. So nothing to be presented today is going to be easy. It's going to be bloody hard. And this is a degree of honesty you really find in the national discussions, at least as I observe it. And it's really frank. So, and I think, of course, as a public official in the Commission, you do not rely on voters, so you can be more frank. But it's also very telling in that he engages, he sees the need to engage on an expectation management. So you wouldn't say this if you were not convinced that this is necessary and to prepare people in their expectation to what is coming up when implementing this package. Yeah, so it's radical steps. Next slide, please, Sebastian. So, and of course, this begs the question: what is the most radical element in it? Or is it radical as a package, or what actually characterizes or defines the radicality in it? And Franz Timmermans also underlined that the one element that this package most relies on in order to be actually fit for 55 is the emission trading scheme. So the proposal comprises two parts: the implementation of a new emission trading scheme for the building and road transport sector, similar to what we have in Germany. We're not going to talk about that. That one is completely new stuff. We will talk about that in the next final conference. Today we will talk about the existing emission trading scheme, and here I put up, I think, this one figure that tells it all, and it's the cap. the cap should be tightened in a way that emission reductions of -62% relative to 2005 level will be achieved in 2030. And this will lead overall emissions on a trajectory to zero until 2040. And this is quite an acceleration. So the previous or the current linear reduction factor is 2.2. So it's roughly half of it. So it will double. And in terms of preponing the decarbonization, that means from moving from 2057, that was previously the year when zero emissions would be reached, to 2040. So it's an enormous acceleration, essentially. And I mean, we know from basic economics, if you tighten the cap, you will see higher prices. So it's a simple but fundamental relationship. And the question, of course, is what does that do, or to which level will this drive prices? And there are two things that are very interesting to remark. So first, accompanying the proposal was an impact assessment conducted by, the usual suspects that use these impact assessments for your commissions using the Primes model. And what the forecast, the impact analysis forecasted is a price of 48 to 52 euro per ton for 2030, which is quite surprising if you compare it with actual prices. And then you will see, and this is put up on the top right here, that actual prices have actually surpassed these forecasted prices for 2030 already. So we are having an enormous development, and we are basically with prices on a trajectory to whatever. So, and this is where we need more analysis to check, is this the kind of price level we can expect? What does our model analysis tells us, and what are the implications for phasing out fossil fuels? So this is basically the overarching questions we are trying to answer. And before I hand over to Sebastian, so one short comment on the things that we are not capturing in the model, or that are reflected in the price development, but that's a completely different animal, is that we do not, when we do the modeling work, we always have a fundamental approach to modeling prices. But in the real markets, we also see a fundamental shift, namely the advent of many new actors from the financial sectors and people who are in anticipation of high prices, drive the prices high. So they front load price increases. I'm just saying that here for completeness, you will not find it in our modeling, but this is an enormously interesting effect because it can be very relevant for the coal phase out in addition. So we not necessarily need to look to what prices are expected. So we need to how these expectations reflect in current prices and how they drive coal. So I think if one takes this into account, the discussion about a preponed coal phase out in Germany should become a quite different one. Okay, that's so far my opening works. Then I hand over to Sebastian.
Thank you, Michael. So I will guide you through the products we have produced during this project, specifically 3 papers. And let's start with the first paper, which is this one that was published this year in Applied Energy, and in which we deal with the main question of the, or I would say one of the main questions of the project, which is what happens with fossil fuels, and what about the carbon prices, and to what extent these carbon prices affect the power sector. So this is a very straightforward paper in which we wanted to analyze what happens with more ambitious targets. And so let me first give you just a short or a brief description of the model that we use for this assessment. And the model is LIMES EU. This is a model developed at PEAK. And it's a linear optimization model with a temporal resolution running in a 5-year step from 2010 to 2017. And specifically for this paper, we model each year with 10 representative days, which are indeed calculated or estimated using a clustering algorithm that basically finds the correlation between supply and demand. So supply, I'm talking about the variable renewable load factors, and demand, of course, the electricity load. So hourly loads and hourly supply, availability of supply from renewables. And so for each day we use 8 time slices, and one very, and I would say a definite assumption that has a strong impact in all of our results is that we assume perfect foresight. That is, all the actors modeled, they know what is going to happen already in 2070. They have all the information about costs, about the cap, about demand, etc. So we can argue about this, but yeah, this is our assumption. And then the geographical scope is all EU. So now I should update this, is EU plus UK plus Switzerland plus Norway and aggregated Balkans. And then we consider different technologies, generation and storage technologies, and to model the whole EU. So basically we want to capture the entire EU-ETS. We also model emissions from the energy intensive industry and the district heating sectors using marginal abatement cost curves. And for this, so this allows us to capture, let's say, the whole interaction between the power sector and the industry in particular, to model this, the whole EU-ETS with all the features, the MSR, etc. But at the same time, we keep a very detailed power sector model. So in this paper that we created mainly 2 families of scenarios. So one is the reference scenario, in which we assume the 2.2% that is currently in the regulation. So the linear reduction factor of 2.2, that leads to 43% reduction in 2030 and a whole budget of 35 gigatons CO2. And then an ambitious scenario, and again, it's well, it's a shame, but it's expected that, of course. So this paper, because of the reviewing process and everything, we cannot model, of course, what is currently in the Fit for 55 package. But this ambitious scenario, in which we indeed assume a 4.3% as linear reduction factor from 2020 already, and leads to a 63% in 2030 reduction on a budget of 19, is not that far from the Fit for 55 proposal. We account for some assumptions about what the cap in the UK will be, and also, of course, the cap in the EU-ETS, we get to 21 gigatons for the cumulative cap from 2020 onwards. But then just some assumptions about the CCS. We assume no CCS before 2030. We assume the phase out plans that are currently in place. So for nuclear in these 3 countries, and for 15 member states according to Beyond Coal. And in the EU-ETS, in this model, we wanted to have a very detailed, or the power sector to model it as detailed as possible. We assume exogenous cancellations from the MSR, and these cancellations indeed were estimated in the paper that we present as follows, or but the other paper that we present, which account to 5.1 gigatons cancellations during the whole period. We had some sensitivities, but I will focus rather on the reference scenario, on the reference and ambitious, but the core scenarios and not the ones with the sensitivities, but just to encourage you to look at the paper. So the very first question, which prices do we need? Or let's put it differently. Under a very ambitious scenario, what is the carbon price? And what we find is that the carbon price with this ambitious scenario will triple. So under a reference scenario, we would reach 35 euros by 2030, but with an ambitious scenario, that would lead to 130 euros per ton of CO2 in 2030. And this, of course, has a huge impact on emissions. So as we see, the emissions from electricity generation decrease already substantially by 2025. And then the sector will be carbon neutral before even 2000. Specifically, since this project is the phase out of fossil fuels, or it's about the phase out of fossil fuels, we also wanted to answer, okay, what happens specifically to gas and coal? And what we see, as expected, is that coal generation drops very significantly in 2025, and one could say there is a de facto phase out already in 2030. There are still a bit less than 20 terawatt hours, but this is mainly for some balancing effects. And then gas, and this is interesting, is that so under an ambitious scenario, so the green line, there is, let's say, a rebound compared with the reference scenario in 2025 because of the large drop of coal. So gas generation increases a bit to cope with this demand that needs to be met anyway. And just in 5 years, maybe there cannot be a step increase in renewable investments. But then already in 2030, there is a drop of 60% of generation compared to 2015. So to have a bigger picture of how these carbon prices are transforming the power sector, what we find is that in 2020, there is still very large share of fossil fuels. But then, as we saw before, so coal generation drops to less than 20 terawatt hours already in 2030. There is still some gas, and then renewables keep increasing. And what is important to see here is that so in the long term, the power sector depends almost exclusively on renewable energies, and this is in line with the other research in the project. That's the one that Carlos presented in the morning. And fossil CCS is not required to reach this decarbonization. There is still some biomass CCS, but not fossil CCS, and also some hydrogen, but not nuclear, already in 2015. And the transformation needs to be very fast. And because here we are talking about more than 70%, indeed 74% of share of renewables in 2030. And this, what does it mean? This means investments of around 50 gigawatts per year in PV and 30 gigawatts per year in wind energy. For hydrogen, that would be 4, and for batteries, that would be 2 gigawatts. And just, although, of course, we need to focus on the, let's say, ambitious scenario, how the world would look like under this Fit for 55 or any resulting regulation that we all know, or I think we can all agree that it should be much more ambitious than what we have in place right now. So if you look at this, the reference scenario, if we continue the way we are going, so we still have significant gas participation in 2035. But what is more important here is even in 2050, the figure or the picture of this generation mix is quite similar in both scenarios. What more ambitious scenario means is that you need to speed up investments in variable renewable by 1 to 5 years, and that basically the phase out is moving ahead 15 years. Here you still see some gas in 2045, but under the ambitious scenario, there will be almost complete phase out, or coal phase out in 2030, and let's say gas phase out almost in 2035. Okay, so very high prices, incredibly strong transformation of the power sector in this decade. At what cost? So what we found is that actually the electricity prices would increase would increase significantly in 2025, about 2 cents per kilowatt hour compared with the reference scenario. But then due to the lower cost of renewables, even if there is increasing carbon prices, so the participation of fossil fuels is increasingly small over time, so total power system costs would increase only by 5% in the ambitious scenario compared to the reference scenario. And now, so to sum up, so in this paper, or the main message is, okay, carbon prices need to increase significantly to reach such ambitious scenario of the 55% emission target, which indeed in this paper we translate to 63% for the EU ETS. And with such prices, the power sector would transform fundamentally already by 2030. So a wide coal phase out in 2030. Gas generation would reduce already by 60% by this year, and this implies that you need to meet this demand somehow, and the only way to do it is with carbon neutral technologies. And what we see is that the renewable need to increase to more than 70% already in 2030. And this, even if the picture in the long term is very similar in both scenarios, there is what the ambitious scenario is doing is speeding up this transition between 2 and 15 years, depending on the technology. And this would allow to cut emissions by half if we compare to the reference scenario, to emissions in the power sector, I mean. And this all could be possible, according to our estimations, at a very limited cost increase of just 5% over time. And this is the first paper. So I see that that Wolf has a question. So yeah, should we open for questions now or in the end? As you wish, Wolf.
As I wish. Well,
Yeah.
Thank you. Should I? Michael, how you? Okay, then very quickly, thanks for the very nice presentation. I just would have a question on the role of hydrogen. So you mentioned, or if I got it right, you have like 2 gigawatts a year for battery expansion, but 4 gigawatts, like double the capacity, at least in terms of power rating for hydrogen. And my question would be, is this meant to be hydrogen in the sense of hydrogen storage, that it's actually electricity that is produced within the EU, then stored in hydrogen and reconverted again? Or is this assumed hydrogen imports, and where would they then come from? Thanks.
No, in these runs, yes, thank you for the question. I should have clarified this before. So we assume that all the hydrogen that is used indeed by the model, so by hydrogen generation technologies or hydrogen-based generation technologies, is indeed produced endogenously in the model. So everything is green hydrogen, and this is hydrogen that will be later be used again by the model to produce electricity.
That is quite interesting. I think that you have this relatively higher importance of hydrogen already relatively early on in the transition. Thanks.
Well, this is the only technology that could play a role on seasonal storage. So that's the main reason driving these investments.
There are two more questions within the chat. I will just read them out for people that haven't read them. One is by Christian Schneider. Sebastian, how are CH4 emissions from upstream losses considered in the CO2 ETS scheme? If they are considered, which are equivalence factors and loss rate assumptions? And then a second question by Paul. How do you derive wholesale electricity prices via marginal cost pricing, or does that induce problems for high shares of renewables?
So the first question is, I never got this question before. No, we don't consider CH4 emissions, to be honest, no. So, no, only CO2. Yeah, but do we do the equivalence? I will need to check. I can come back to Christian Schneider to answer this question. Right now, I'm not sure, to be honest. And then the second question about how do we derive wholesale electricity prices? Yes, it's basically the marginal of the balance, of the energy balance constraint. And then, so we have, of course, the balance constraint, but there is also a constraint considering a sort of the rating capacity. So all the higher share of renewables, which we actually only consider a bound for renewables for Germany in 2030, is implicitly accounted by these constraints.
I have one more question. It's addressed to both of you, maybe also a bit to Michael, because you mentioned at the beginning that there might be quite some banking of certificates. I assume that or the question is, do you know how much this is? I assume that not, but the question then related to it, do you think this is a problem? Because in general, the way that the ETS works, you have an overall amount of certificates, and even if people would buy these certificates earlier and then just bank them, this would of course change the evolvement of the price. But at the same time, the overall amount of certificates doesn't get more. So do you think it would be a problem? Because through this banking, I would assume that prices now are much higher than they normally would be. And then in the past, they would maybe be not as high as anticipated. And do you think this would be then good because it basically induces investments early onwards and gives the right signals? Or is it a problem because then in 2030, we will still only have a CO2 price of 60 euros and therefore not high enough CO2 prices to give sufficient return for green hydrogen or something like this?
So I will give you much more details on banking and carbon prices in the next paper, which actually deals with the effects of firms actually withholding certificates to use them in the future. But I don't see this as a problem. So from the economic point of view, I mean, it's good that you can bank because then you can, or you bank when it's economically profitable for you to make these abatement decisions in later. And what is interesting is that the more you bank now actually might have an impact on how tight the cap is. And this is because of the MSR. And I think this is very interesting because this actually let's say, deals with what you are suggesting, that, okay, you can bank more, much more, but then you have all these certificates bank, and you don't take the abatement decisions that you might take if there was some sort of limitations of banking. So there is some interesting interactions there between the cap and the banking decision. Michael, I don't know if you want to add something.
Yeah, on the banking issue, I mean, the price for allowances is the expected future scarcity. And so banking affects this price in the way it affects the expected scarcity. If that's a satisfying answer to your question, Pahle.
That's fine for me. I'm looking forward to the next presentation. Basically, I'm not sure whether Wolf still has his hand risen from before, whether it's a new piece.
Sorry, that was the old one.
Okay, still go. Okay, then I think I don't see any more hands or questions. Then I think you can continue. Or
yeah. So in this paper, just to come back a bit. So we saw the impact of more ambitious targets on the power sector. Then the next question is, or not the next question, but there is this, I wouldn't say new element, but let's say that so far has not had much impact, or this direct impact on the EU-ETS, and is the market stability reserve. The question is, so to what extent could the MSR tighten further the ETS? And which problems might arise from reforming the MSR, or the MSR review, which is one of the points envisaged in the Fit for 55. And just a bit of a recap of what the MSR is for. I don't know if this is or was, because there are new elements in the Fit for 55 proposal, but basically the MSR was created in 2015 to deal with the structural supply-demand imbalance. And there are three main rules. So when the total number of allowances in circulation, and we use this term a lot, so the TNAC is higher than 833, so then some certificates are transferred to the MSR. So basically certificates that were going to be auctioned, they are instead transferred to the MSR. And the intake rate was 20, or is 24% until 2023 and 12% after. Again, these are old numbers, or not old, but are the numbers that are in place. The new proposal indeed wants to keep the 24% at least until 2030. Then if the TNAC is below 400 megatons of CO2, then the MSR releases certificate to the market. So the market is tight, and then the MSR releases certificate. This was the main idea. So when the market, there is oversupply, then the MSR tightens the market, but then when there is a scarcity, then the MSR relieves the market. And indeed, the first papers that modeled the MSR showed that it was, how do you call this? Like a cap neutral, basically, that it didn't affect the cap in the long term. So it might tighten the cap in the bit at the beginning, but then all these certificates would come back to the market. And this is something, or we found something different. I will go through this in detail later. And then one of the latest provisions, including the MSR, was that if the MSR was higher than the auction from previous year, then the difference between both would be cancelled. So these certificates would remain invalid. In the new proposal, they keep it simple and they just say, okay, if it's above 400. But let's focus on these numbers and these conditions. And what I mentioned before that, okay, some publications, there was an initial wave of publication about the MSR around 2016. They showed that the cap or the accumulated cap wouldn't change. But what we found indeed is a prolonged period of cancellations. So if you see, for instance, here the gray dotted line, this is the original cap. And then the bars are the auctions and the free allocation. And we see every time it's below, it's because some of the certificates that were going to be auctioned were actually transferred to the MSR. And what we see here is that there are almost transfers every year, except for a couple of years, 2023, 2025, and there are transfers to the MSR until 2043. At the same time, if you see, the MSR is decreasing. It's decreasing every year. And it's decreasing every year because auctions are decreasing, so it's making more likely that cancellation occurs. So the MSR level decreases, and the next year you still have, because of banking, so the TNAC keeps at least building up until 2034 or so. And even if it decreases later, it's above the threshold. So there are still transfers to the MSR. And these transfers are eventually canceled. And this is how we get to 2.8 gigatons canceled until 2030 and 5.1 in total until 2057, which is the end of the EU-ETS for us, or 2057. If we keep this linear reduction factor of 2.2, then the last certificate would be released in 2057. And now the question is, okay, if there is going to be a review, we need to understand better this mechanism and how changes in the different parameters affect the MSR. And when we say affect the MSR, we focus mainly on cumulative cancellations. And the main parameters are the threshold, the intake rate, the outtake rate, and I'm missing one, and the free allocation. Here I will focus on those whose results are more interesting. So first, what we see is that, I would say as expected, so the upper threshold has a higher impact on cancellations. And this is not only because, or the main reason is that the upper threshold, if you decrease it, then you will make more likely that you are above the upper threshold, and then you keep transfer to the MSR for longer. Instead, the lower threshold, which mainly has to do with the amount that is released from the MSR, has little impact. And then one of the, I would say, most interesting results in the MSR is the intake rate, because the intake rate, what show us is, so just to remember, right now is 24%. What is currently in the regulation is that this will be 12% after 2023. But there is not much impact on the intake rate, on cancellations. The reason is that if you increase the intake rate, you might have a strong impact in 1 year, but then the cap will decrease that much that you will be below the threshold. So the next year you don't transfer to the MSR. If we take here the example of 12%, 12, 24, and 36%, what we see is that it actually has a very big impact on the TNAC and on the on the intake flows to the MSR, and these intake flows keep oscillating. So the higher the intake rate. So when it's 24% for it, when it's 12%, so you have intake, which is the continuous lines below. It's almost continuous during until or between 2023 and 2040, while when it's 12, you have these peaks, then it's 0, and there are even more peaks and zeros when it's 36. And this is because you're transferring a lot to the MSR, so you are decreasing the number of certificates that you're auctioning, and then the next year the market is tighter and you are below of the threshold, so you don't transfer. And this is important because in a context of uncertainty, this can lead to even more uncertainty in the market and potentially affect the price. Now, the linear reduction factor. So the linear reduction factor, what we found is that there is a reinforcement effect between basically the cap and the MSR cancellations. And this is because the tighter the cap, so this means it will be more, there will be more scarcity in the long term, so you bank more, or you are encouraged to bank more. At the same time, if you know that it will be more scarce in the long term, this already affects the short-term prices. So you not only, so first you have a motivation to bank more, and also with higher prices, now you abate more now. And this increases the TNAC. So basically, when it remains unused in the market. Since the TNAC increases, then you have a higher intake into the MSR, and most of this intake ends up being canceled or being invalid for the MSR. And this is very interesting because this means that even with moderate increases of the linear reduction factor, you can deliver a more ambitious target. But here I don't want to be, so I'm not claiming that that the linear reduction factor should be increased just a bit because the MSR will do the job. First, because the MSR was not, at least in principle, created for this. And second, because we need to understand that there are a lot of uncertainties around the cancellations. And just to give you an example of these uncertainties, so this is, we perform a wide sensitivity analysis for different parameters in the model, like cost, fuel costs, renewable capital costs, the marginal abatement cost curves, and also the interest rate or the discount rate. And what we found is we use as a default 5%, but when you increase already even the discount rate to 7%, so emissions, cancellation is decreases by more than 50%. So you cannot really say, okay, just increase the linear reduction factor in a small proportion because everything else would be canceled, or because the cap will be tightened by the MSR. So to sum up, this is so how to tweak the MSR. Well, there are different mechanisms operating. One of them is that the intake rate actually has no major impact on total cancellations. It does have an impact on temporal cancellations, or the temporal profile of transfers to the MSR, but this could indeed cause additional price volatility or price shocks depending on what people are expecting. And then under certain conditions, so there is a risk of overshooting because of this reinforcement effect between the linear reduction factor and cancellations. But these results depend on economic factors, regulatory factors, and also on the expectations that actors have on the market. So as Michael said, it's not only the prices that you are expecting in the future, is the fact that since you are expecting those prices, this already affects your current valuation, let's say, of abatement, and affect ultimately the carbon prices right now. And this is difficult to predict, and this, of course, will have a strong impact on the MSR and on the size of the cap. So what we briefly propose in this paper is that maybe, and this might not be politically feasible right now, but to go towards a price stability reserve, as this could indeed be more efficient from the economic point of view, and would give the actors more certainty about a price corridor or the carbon prices, which in the end is what influences their decisions, or their abatement decision. And so we have been talking a lot about prices, carbon prices, and in the last two papers, or in the papers that I have presented, so carbon prices are expected to increase significantly, but there are many, of course, factors that are disregarded in a numerical model, and one of them is the social and the political factors. So to what extent high carbon prices interact with politics? And this is what we wanted to answer in the next paper, and which Michael is going to present.
Yeah, thanks. So everyone can relax. It's just one slide on this paper, not another 5 will follow. And I mean, I do not go into the details, but I think what Sebastian just mentioned, that the MSR can backfire, in the sense that if you increase the LIF, it also increases cancellation, driving prices even higher. So, and that in many cases, when the LIF was debated, this was not really considered, or not considered to the proper extent. So we might end up seeing prices rising considerably. And with this paper, we are asking the question, okay, we do not take the cap or the regulation in place as given, but we ask the question, what would happen? Or we assert that if prices rise rapidly, there could be pushback, and there could be a dismantling, so a softening of the cap. And I think everyone has this intuition. This is why carbon pricing is so contested in the first place, I guess. Otherwise, we would just all go the FDP route, let prices as high as they want. But just these days, we are observing from the rise in power prices that there's a pushback, there's at least a vivid political debate on how to counteract that. And so here we are asking the question in some sort of self-criticism. I mean, this is a part of carbon pricing. So we are not ignorant that regulation can be changed along the way. So we are asserting that if prices become too hockey stick shaped, which is basically that they rise too strongly in too short time. And that's the critical element. It's not that prices will be high, but they will rise too steeply in too short time. That's the problem, allowing actors or regulated firms not to adapt to the situation, that there might be a softening of the cap. And our indicator that can measure the degree or the extent of this risk of a pushback is the curvature or the hockey stick shaped path. So the bending essentially of the price path. And we know that the main determinant for the cost, for the shape of the price path is the cost of capital for renewables. It's also the investment cost, but it's the cost of capital. And this is determined by two factors. So the general interest rate, which at the moment is very low. Many people forget this. So you can get money basically at zero cost of capital. And also that we have, basically all countries. So now the slides disappeared, but I just keep on talking. That we have in many European countries a renewable policy that actually transfers market risk away from new projects and investments, implying that there's no or just a small risk premium. And so if you would consider a future change of regulation that takes away or phases out these kind of policies, then also a development, a macroeconomic development that would imply a rising general interest rate. And we can already observe this in the US. And we should be worried, I mean, also given the inflation. So I think it's not very unlikely that we will see a change in the interest rate. And if we assume that both will happen and both will mean a markup on the cost of capital of 5% expressed in a general discount rate, we would see a considerably stronger rise in the discount in the allowance price paths. This is shown in the figure on the bottom right. So in the low discount rate scenario, the price evolves along the blue path. It's nicely and smoothly bended. No one will worry about that. But in the case of a high discount rate, it starts smaller. This is how it should be according to economic theory, but rises much more steeply towards the end. And the price difference is more than double. So whereas in one case we end up with around 70, we end up with more than 200 by 2055 in the different scenario. So this is reason to be worried. I mean, this is not meaning to say that this is a future that will actually materialize, but this is reason to be worried about both the development of general interest rate and about exposing renewables to the market risk fully. And so this is basically what we want to bring to attention in terms of, or specifically for the debate of how to develop the coexistence of carbon pricing and renewable policies, and point to the really relevant role that the cost of capital and the question of risk transfer plays. So it's not, I mean, it's not completely new and innovative what we are doing. I think the innovation comes from bringing the political aspect, or the assuming regulations flexible and looking at the policy feedback. So the feedback from policy and politics, and drawing these conclusions for how to advance further the design of renewable policies. Yeah, so that's just a short teaser for the paper, hopefully to be published soon. And then we can move on to the last slide, and to Sebastian, can you put up the last slide?
Yeah.
You want to take this, or shall I take it?
I can take it. So we focus in these three papers, and although you might see them completely disconnected, I would say that, or the idea with this presentation is to convince you that they are not. And indeed, so we wanted first to go straightforward to the main question of this project, is what happens with fossil fuels, what happens with carbon prices, and how does the power sector change. And we focus, of course, on this interaction between the national and the EU policies, or I would say rather how the EU affects national power sectors. And what we found is that you need more than 100 euros per ton by 2030 if you want to reach such very ambitious targets. And this would also imply that the power sector becomes carbon neutral by 2040 at a very limited cost in terms of electricity prices. But this is the impact of the cap. And what we want to tell you is that, okay, you should not forget the MSR, because sometimes it appears to be disregarded. And the MSR could have very strong effects on the EU-ETS as a whole, in terms of total cancellations, and also very undesired effects, depending on how you change it, how you modify it, maybe in order to strengthen the ETS. And you should be very aware that there is a reinforcement effect between the cap and the MSR, even if, of course, the assumption we make about perfect foresight might not be realistic. You need to take into account that there will always be expectations about future prices. You can argue this is not until 2070, but some years or whatever. And these expectations affect already the carbon prices right now, and the carbon prices right now affect what is abated right now. And this has an effect on the MSR and ultimately on the ETS cap. But again, these are estimations under very certain parameters, and we are aware that there might be or that there is uncertainty regarding some of these economic regulatory parameters, and also on how actors behave, and more importantly, on how these markets are perceived by the different social actors and political actors. And that if prices increase very steep, there might be a political backlash, and that all the regulation that is in place, it might sound stupid, it's in place until someone changes it, and that everything could change depending on the dynamics of the market, and in this case of the EU ETS. So we need to reach very high decarbonization rates in the long term. So we are addressing, or we are going towards a climate neutrality in 2050. That means there is a need for large investments in renewables. But if there is a political backlash, this might not be possible. So the politics should already ensure that this transition is as smooth as possible. And this implies, or to achieve this, you might think about some solutions like de-risking renewable investments, as they have been so far, but they might not be in the future, depending on the different changes in monetary policy or different changes in the financial, from the financial perspective. And you need to adapt these instruments, the design of these instruments to carbon markets. And I think that's it. Yeah. Yes. So this is how you and Wolf and.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I have a question. It's mostly addressing the new slides by Michael and this hockey stick curve. And of course, I would fully like it if there's some more way of reducing risks for renewables and therefore basically increasing the price now. I think this is something that all of us would love. I'm just wondering in how far there's also negative sides of reducing the price at 2050 from, I don't know, 200 euros to 80 euros or something, because I was just wondering, in how far do we actually also need these high prices for other innovations? I don't know, I'm not the biggest fan of it, but still negative emission technologies, direct air capture. There's lots of other things which you always find also in models of PIC, if you especially look at the time frame after 2050, which don't really have a market at a CO2 price of 80 euros per ton, I would assume. So therefore, I can understand the need to lower the price at 2050, but at the same time, I'm not sure whether other elements are then possible, unless we simply are honest to people and say the price will be above 100 euros per ton. And as long as we tell people early enough that in 2050 the price will be at this level, industry could also try to plan for it.
I mean, so in our model, the price is endogenous, and with the price we see, the lower prices, we can achieve the climate target. And we do not have, I think, most of the very fancy but novel technologies in it. So if you would put them in there, I think we would see higher prices. I think in case of our model, it's mostly that we assume that that renewable will become even more or even less expensive, and there's plenty of room to deploy them. So I think it's pretty much there. So I think that might answer your question. If we have a different calibration in terms of technology available and costs, we would see higher prices. And what we're actually looking at is just a differential effect. And this differential effect is driven then by risk reduction, but it's very clear that this risk does not disappear. So it goes somewhere. So we see it popping up, but not in the allowance price. So it's a little bit strategical. If you would be fair, you would need to have a general equilibrium model, and then, I mean, our argument would collapse, or it need a bit more of a sophisticated explanation. And in terms of what Wolf brought up in the chat, so I mean, I think what we are asserting with the starting point of this paper is that we are seeing arguments or positions, I mean, by FDP, for instance, but also by other actors, to phase out renewables, because this is, you cannot subsidize forever. So, and I think we have made some timid steps in Germany already. We have more ambitious steps in other countries that are more have transferred more risk to renewable projects. But so in a sense, this is a principal question. Do we want to go on with it? And what I would say, or what we are saying, is we are cautioning against this step. So we are anticipating a situation that is not there and already cautioning against it. So we are ahead of time. We are ahead of the discussion in a double way, actually. But nevertheless, I think it's essential to have this on the radar, and then how much love and how much toughness is appropriate. I mean, that's hard to tell, and you've probably followed the discussions on the Strommarktverteiler about PPAs and stuff. So it could be if the future model of deployment is mainly through corporate PPA or something, then we would have that already. So we would have the risk transfer mechanism. And this is how hard it must get, and maybe we get better products on the exchange, and so on and so on. But it's essentially a cautioning of not being too simplistic. I mean, sorry, Paul, you was a bit beyond your actual question, but I think this is really the takeaway here. Not looking at the numbers too much. If I may say so.
I have a small question, I'm not sure, regarding the overall CO2 emissions that you then have. I think you also mentioned the overall budget within the ETS that is then assumed or being used, so to speak. And then you basically say that I think 5 gigatons can be subtracted because they're not even used. Have you taken into consideration how far this is then in line with the IPCC report, and in how far this is then a fair share, so to speak, for Europe? So is this something where you would say that what we're aiming for now, fit for 55, this is ambitious, but still, is this sufficient for Europe? Or do you anyhow also expect or state the need for an even stronger tightening of the overall amount of CO2 emissions in addition to the MSR?
And the thing is that, for instance, when in the previous proposals, when the proposal of the 43% or the new proposal from the 5th for 55, it's like the MSR cancellation would come on top of the actual targets, because so this 55% EU-wide is translated basically 61% for the EU ETS. But this is given by the cap. But the cap could indeed change already in 2030, depending on what the MSR does. And the overall budget, which my understanding is that, so at least the accumulated cap proposed by the European Commission is in line with Paris 1.5 degrees. Then the MSR cancellations would be indeed additional to these efforts. So yeah, I would say that it's in line with the current targets.
Yeah, maybe I can shortly add to that, because I think it touches upon a broader point of the question: do we want to, which stance do we take towards assigning budgets and adhering to them? I mean, here in our work, we have been mainly ignorant, or just taken the targets as are. But personally, I think, I mean, so what is the kind of reference? I mean, what is the right allocation of budget? And what is the right level of the budget? This is a question for maybe more for the natural scientists. But what is the fair allocation of budget? And I'm aware that it was picked up. There's the report by SAU. It was picked up by the Supreme Court. But I think and this is probably also a recurring theme in all of the analysis that we are doing. I think that the much more urgent and much more challenging question is how to get us on a path that's leading towards climate neutrality. I personally, I think that the discussion, I mean, talking too much or being insistent on the right budget, it's a kind of distraction. I know this is far beyond the work we are doing. It's much more of a political discussion, but since it was also a prominent topic in the webinar, I thought I might bother you with my opinion.
But I think it's a valuable opinion. I would partly disagree, but because I think also it's even in our work as scientists, there's the IPCC, and the IPCC is doing their work, and we are part of the IPCC community, so to speak, and therefore the IPCC is coming up with numbers for the entire world, and therefore it is always important to state in how far what is happening in our geographical regions that we analyze, in our case Europe, and how far this is in line in certain ways with the assumptions by IPCC or with the targets brought forward by IPCC. If the IPCC does for 1.5 degree, we need this and this. And then we analyze in how far Europe is in line with the Paris target, or in how far their targets are in line with what has been internationally agreed on. And then, of course, it's always possible to state that our assumptions on a fair allocation of budget are per person, per capita, or whatsoever, or basically assume that additional things are done elsewhere. And of course, there's international connections, green hydrogen coming from anywhere else, causing emissions there whatsoever. But I still think that it's important for us to put it into context, at least also within the academic debate. That again, from a political perspective, it's much more complex. Is out of question. But,
yeah, but still, I think, I mean, in terms, of course, you're right. This is a question to answer. So, is this how do we view the targets or the budgets? I mean, in terms of fitting into the national agreements, but I think of giving advice for how to move forward. I cannot really see how insisting on a tighter budget is in any way constructive, given what we have already. So I don't think we lack ambitious targets. I do think the bigger problem, the bigger risk we are facing is that we are now putting policies in place that eventually bring us nowhere. So this is why I would strongly call for us to put emphasis on, I mean, finding the right first step for the long-term pathway. I mean, I know it's a bit vague here, but I think the policy questions are much more urgent than the long-term budget questions at this point.
And then maybe one bit different question from my end. What is your opinion upon the German way forward, basically these additional CO2 price that we have for transport and heat? And of course, all of us agree it's far too low, it should be increased, etc. But do you still then think this is valuable and in some way can also be integrated into the European scheme in some manner? Or do you think also it's a bit counterproductive because it's not something agreed on a European level, or at least with the neighboring countries, etc., and just
I think there are two sides to it. I mean, from what I've heard and observed, it has been enormously helpful to implement a national carbon pricing, because without the German system, we would never have seen a proposal to establish a second system on the EU level. So I think this was enormously instrumental. But at the same time, I think pursuing, going the route of orienting everything towards the national climate targets has a high risk of ending in a dead end. So, I'm playing around with the idea of proposing a phase out of national targets. So it would be very much FDP-like, I have to admit. Probably not much sympathies. But I think we are trapped here. We are really at a branching point. So if we go on with focusing all our attention and energy on the national targets, which makes a lot of sense in order to drive decarbonization here and foster motivation and societal support, we might do very well on the national level, but we might not bring enough energy to the European negotiations. So I think we must find a way of institutionally self-commit to making the Green Deal work. And this can only work when giving up part of our autonomy and our desire to do it all right within our own borders. And so I think we should, as early as possible, link up all our policies to European policies and connect the German pricing scheme to the ETS or to the new ETS, at the risk of when EU climate policy will fail, then German policy will automatically fail too. But I think if the Green Deal will fail, then the whole international climate policy will fail. So that's just a risk trade-off, essentially.
I didn't want to capture the entire debate, so therefore, if other people want to state some things, bring things forward, of course.
We are also 15 minutes overtime. Maybe they are asleep already or left.
Yeah.
Apart from Wolf, who has his camera on, and everyone can see that.
I think actually that we're just still on time. So actually we're just on time. We're supposed to end at 2:30 with your session, and it's now
it's on time.
It's 2:29 or something. So it's a bit uncommon, but we are on time.
Oh, great! So we have more time. So then we can sermon.
No, but if there are no more other questions by others, then there's just one additional thing that I would like to add. Maybe if you can stop the screen sharing, Sebastian. Thanks. Then there is something that we will. We can also stop the recording now. I think that we will basically